Welcome back to our 128th meeting of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. This meeting is being televised. As we begin our study of the question of privilege related to the matter of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police publications respecting Bill C-71, an act to amend certain acts and regulation in relation to firearms, we are pleased to be joined by Glenn Motz, Member of Parliament for Medicine Hat, Cards Warner. Members will recall that it was Mr. Motz who raised the question of privilege. Thank you for making yourself available today, Mr. Motz. You may now proceed with your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, colleagues. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about the conduct of this Liberal government and the RCMP and their activities around the implementation of Bill C-71. While I will attempt to present my remarks in a dispassionate way, it is challenging not to be angered at the arrogance shown by the Liberals in their presentation of this bill and the systematic way the government ministers and MPs have tried to mislead Canadians. This is a contributing factor on the question of privilege I raised earlier this spring. And here's the central issue. The RCMP began implementing a proposed law, Bill C-71, before Parliament had deliberated, debated, and voted on the bill. The RCMP had posted to their website Special Bulletin number 93, a notice implementing portions of Bill C-71. At the time, the bill was before committee and under intense scrutiny. The bulletin made use of definitive language, giving Canadians the distinct impression that this bill was in fact current law of Canada. On May 29th, I raised the issue that the RCMP was assuming Parliament would approve the bill, despite the significant reservations of millions of Canadians and many in Parliament. Within 24 hours of that question of privilege being raised, the RCMP modified their Special Bulletin number 93 to remove a presumption of Parliament's final decision. On that same day, May 30th, I rose again to let the Speaker know of the recent change. On June 19th, the Speaker noted he was troubled by the careless manner in which the RCMP chose to ignore the fact that the bill was still before Parliament and not a law. This may seem like a technical issue, but it is this technical issue that supports our very system of a parliamentary democracy. Prime ministers, ministers, departments, and agencies are all subject to Parliament. Of all departments and agencies, a federal law enforcement one should not be so careless with Parliament in implementing laws. Parliament is the voice for all Canadians, and it is beholden on us to scrutinize those laws, rules, and regulations for Canadians. The message being sent to Parliament by the Minister and by the RCMP is that they can act without Parliament. And that contravenes the purpose of this House, those of you sitting around these tables today. It suggests that ministers and senior government officials are ultimately in full control, rather than the elected officials. As Speaker Regan said, the work of members as legislators is fundamental, and any hint or suggestion of this parliamentary role and authority being bypassed or usurped is not acceptable, end of quote. Today, the members of this committee will have the first opportunity in Canada to set the standard for departments and agencies that assume the will of Parliament. We cannot allow the precedent to be and have a muted response. A decision was made to implement legislation despite the highly contentious nature of the bill and the serious and valid reservations from thousands of Canadians and parliamentarians. And it falls on you, as this committee, to determine who made those decisions, who is responsible, and how we deter this from occurring again. The questions before you, as I see them, are many, but some could include: did the RCMP set rules ahead of parliamentary decision independently, or were they instructed to do so? There are only two potential answers: yes or no. If the answer was yes, then the RCMP made a decision to prioritize their objectives ahead of the voice of our elected representatives. The police in this country do not create the rules and the law. They enforce them, a fundamental function of the separation of powers in a democracy. If the answer is no, then who directed the RCMP to proceed? And conspicuous by the absence, where has the Minister of Public Safety been on this issue? The RCMP report to Parliament through the Minister, and the Minister is responsible for their actions. I contend that if the Minister did not actively instruct the RCMP, then he's guilty by failing to do his job in overseeing the RCMP. He has made no comments or statements to address the issue, other than his parliamentary secretary, the now Liberal whip, the member from Ajax, and that member sought to have the issue dismissed. I know the investigation the committee is now charged to undertake is not about this one instance. It is about a broader principle of ensuring that the House can hold prime ministers, ministers, departments, crown corporations, and agencies to account for action and taking action that conflicts with, undermines, or otherwise ignores the direction and deliberations of Parliament. Public servants should always be mindful of the House and our democracy. As parliamentarians, we can disagree, but the function of this House is dependent on the House reviewing and approving the actions of government. Members of Parliament are not here to serve the will of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. We're here to serve our constituents. Ministers and Prime Ministers are subject to the direction and will of Parliament, not the other way around. And I urge you all to look at the facts of the case and see the overall picture. It's hard to argue that the Minister has approached this particular legislation with full integrity and transparency. When there is a systematic and a consistent attempt to deceive, it becomes harder and harder to believe the individual in question. So far, the government leadership have made factually inaccurate statements, and it could be suggested that they were made to mislead the public on the true nature of this legislation. For example, the Prime Minister suggested that currently no one needs to prove that they have a firearms license to purchase a firearm. The truth is, selling or buying a firearm in this country without a proper license is a criminal offense and carries a maximum penalty of 5 years in jail. The Minister appeared before committee and used several misleading statements as well. He indicated that based on Toronto Police Service stats, half of crime guns were from domestic sources. And even after those numbers were proven to be completely false, the Minister continued to use them. He indicated that there was a sudden spike in violent gun crimes, when in fact, violent gun crime and homicide by firearms are not at record levels. He used selective dates and stats to create the appearance of a crisis where none existed. And finally, he reported a massive increase in break-and-enters to steal a firearm, when in fact, this charge was first introduced in 2008, and the sudden increase was primarily the result of the application of a new criminal code charge where none existed previously. I could go on with many more examples, but I believe the point's been made. The testimony of the Minister and of this government to date has been flawed and misleading. The added fact that the RCMP, upon the issue being raised in the House, immediately revised their bulletin is nothing short of an admission of guilt. The Minister of Public Safety replied to a letter from my colleague from Charlesburg, Host St. Charles, and I on an issue within the bill. In his reply dated October the 15th of this year, he acknowledged that there is a flaw in the legislation and he would grant a 3-year amnesty, no doubt in part because of the overreach of the RCMP. However, there is no indication or responsibility of whether the bulletin from the RCMP was posted through ignorance or intent. This falls to the investigation and determination of this committee. It is therefore critical that a decisive and clear report show the prejudgment of Parliament to be a serious issue. This committee is responsible for upholding a key part of our Parliament and democracy, where ministers and agencies of the government must respect and abide by the House. In closing, I would ask each of you to review the ruling of the Speaker. Putting aside political allegiances and party standing, Speaker Regan put the will of Canadians and their elected representatives ahead of the defense of party brands. He spoke truth to power and called on you to ensure that this Parliament and each one after this is empowered by the Canadians who voted for them, rather than obligated to follow a party hierarchy. When ministers and parties use misinformation and positions of authority to obstruct the House and its duties, we put our democracy in jeopardy. Look beyond our disagreements and toward the values that bring Canadians together. These values must be reflected and upheld in our Parliament, and the ability of Parliament to hold each other and the government to the will of the people. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Mr. Motts. Now we'll go to 7-minute rounds of questioning, and we'll start with Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Motts. Is it Motts or Moats? Motts, right?
Motts, yep.
I think you might be on the right path here. Misleading members of the House is something that is contemptuous indeed. I don't disagree with that. I looked at the language that was on the website, and it certainly does use language in the sense that, you know, this is either happening or going to happen in a way that you should be prepared. The only part where we diverge, I think, is on intent. I won't write this off as an innocent mistake, but I don't want to describe it or characterize it as being particularly malicious either. I've seen this before. I've seen a couple examples. I can give you a couple examples where this has happened. For example, sometimes you can say that there are many bureaucrats, many people in agencies, people who work for the government. In essence, they work for the people of this country. They prepare themselves for what is around the corner. To me, there's a lot of due diligence there. For example, we just went through a lot of work on the Elections Act, Canada Elections Act. If the people of Elections Canada did not prepare themselves for what might be coming, then the situation would be exacerbated even further. More difficulties way down the line. For them, I think it's an issue of due diligence. Now, did the police in this case do due diligence? To a certain degree, I think they did, because they wanted to let the public know what is changing and what not. Do you think that maybe they should have said, okay, this is what's going to happen, using that language, this is what's going to happen, this is the new rule, this is how you have to register yourself, if you have a firearm, this is what's going to be, but then at the end said, pending parliamentary approval? Would that have sufficed?
Well, thank you for your question. I think it's fair to say that your assessment of trying to get ahead of the ball, if you will, get ahead of the curve on being proactive is probably an accurate depiction of what they were trying to do. However, I would suggest that rather than leaving language like that to the back end, you do it at the front end. This is the proposed legislation that is before Parliament. It is being discussed in the House. It's being debated at committee.
Yeah, I know. You know, I didn't mean to cut you off. I totally agree with you, because I was particularly appalled a few years ago, dated 2014. The headline says, Harper government spending funds on ads for measures still, quote, subject to parliamentary approval. Their ads were basically saying, these tax breaks are coming right at the bottom, subject to parliamentary approval. I didn't like that, and I'm sure you didn't either when it was happening. But in this particular case, when the police made the correction, I guess you'd call it an admission of guilt, or we did something wrong. We're going to have the minister here to get his explanation behind it. But to a great extent, yes, I do agree with you. And not to get into the weeds about the issue itself. But I think in this particular case, I don't want to discourage people who work in the public service to not practice due diligence, to be prepared. As I was angry with Stephen Harper for the ads that he did, they were misleading, and in this case, it is misleading too. But it's the intent that bothers me. Because if the intention, like it was in 2014, was to say, this is going to happen, we have the majority, so what are you worried about? Then that's not right. But if this is something of due diligence that the public service is doing, then good on them. Just don't pretend, like in this case, that it is going to happen. But we'll ask the minister when he gets here.
Fair enough. I think the minister has a lot to answer for with respect to this. I think it's important to recognize as well that when you are making a statement or putting out a publication that impacts thousands of Canadians, that can make them believe and act in a way that they could become a criminal overnight. Their understanding of this means that if we don't comply, we're going to be criminalized, which is what the impact was. It's important that there be some understanding at the front end of that.
Sorry, I'm asking, this is a sincere question. Is that the language they used?
Well, no, but the repercussions of what they're suggesting, that this will be in effect, it will have this impact,
and
it was still being debated in committee. Did
they suggest something, or did they say, these are the rules that will be in place? There are no ramifications to it, or there will be, of course, but they didn't allude to the fact that, you will be punished if. Is that right?
No, but the Canadian firearm owning community is the most responsible of the Canadian public, and they know. And they're the ones who follow the rules.
Was that mentioned in the website?
Pardon me?
Was that mentioned in the website?
What was what?
That they are the most responsible? I mean, hey, listen, gun owner myself, I consider myself to be quite responsible, as most of them are, no doubt about it. But I'm not sure, because I'm trying to nail down the intent of this, which is to say, I don't think that they were out there to deliberately mislead people. Do you really think that Mounties did that?
I have some suspicions, but I really think that it's the responsibility of this committee to find out by asking and seeking evidence of, okay, who authorized it?
Okay.
What was the intent behind it? It's who you call as witnesses are going to be critical, sir, to the finding of the fact that you want to, whatever conclusions you want to draw. And I think the most important thing to remember is, irregardless of whether as your contention was, it was an honest mistake, it was, there was no intent to mislead, whatever words you chose to use, is that it doesn't happen again. And
I totally agree.
Yeah, that's the responsibility I take it from this committee. So I'm not here to presume the will of the committee.
But you're making a presumption on intention. I got the feeling that you were making that presumption, that the intention was bad. I think in the first sentence, the word arrogance was used. I'm not sure if arrogance was really the right word to be at this point. The minister hasn't even been in yet. Don't you think that's rather presumptive?
No, I don't at all, actually. I think it's completely evidenced by the
arrogance is evidence, or is evident?
Yeah, I was being very polite. The response that I'm getting from constituents, the response that I'm getting from Canadians on C-71 are not as politically correct as that.
Would you be offended if I said that your opinion was arrogant? Would you be offended
by that?
Not at
all. Mr. Sims, your time is up. Okay, we'll go on to Ms. Cusi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Glenn, thank you so much for being here today and presenting, certainly, well, I should say presenting this case to the House, but also, for your bravery in being here, especially as a former law official. This must be very hard for you to stomach that, certainly people that come from the same profession of which you were a proud part of for so long, were a part of making such a grave error. So I was interested in if you could give me an idea of how many stakeholders contacted you, would you say, in regards to this slip of information which occurred on the website?
I have no idea how many that I've personally received from an office. I haven't tracked them. I know.
But they contacted you.
Yes.
And what would you say were their concerns when they contacted you? What types of things did you hear on the phone and in emails when you received these communications about this misinformation on the website?
From a lot of fronts, it was quite clear that they were confused. I thought the overarching conversation was I thought this was still being debated. I didn't realize that it had been passed. What's happened? There was confusion. There was angst in the firearm community, especially those who were going to be impacted by what the bulletin had suggested. And I think it's unfortunate that whoever and however the decision was made to post this information with the definitive language that was used, really created an opportunity again for Canadians to disrupt, to discredit, the National Law Enforcement Agency, which is most unfortunate.
Yep, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. How would you describe the emotions of the people when they contacted you? I mean, my goodness, under this misinformation, this penalty potentially carries the punishment of 5 years in prison. I can't imagine waking up one morning and reading some information that potentially subjects you to 5 years in prison overnight. So what was their emotions when they were contacting you? You mentioned some confusion. Was there some fear as well?
Yes, there was. First of all, and rightfully so, many Canadians, including the law-abiding gun-owning community, is quite concerned about the ramifications of C-71 and what it doesn't do for what we're trying to tackle, and that's a gang and gun issue in this country, and gun violence and gang violence. And they're already concerned about the misguided approach that the government is taking with that, and then to add on top of it the confusion that suggests that we are now. They didn't understand the process, that they circumvented Parliament. It's just like, I thought you guys were still talking about this, and now I'm in a panic. Am I going to be a criminal overnight?
That's a good word. Yeah.
And so there was concern. There was confusion and concern in the firearms community.
I really thank my colleague, the honourable member from Coast of Bay Central Notre Dame, for bringing up the advertising case. I would say there are some major discrepancies, though, between that and this. I mean, the RCMP is just law enforcement. They can't presume the law, but I also think it's very important to point out that that case and its ruling wasn't determined to be prima facie, and this one was. I mean, that is a major differentiation between the two. But Mr. Motz, I'd also like to point out to the historic ruling of Speaker Fraser, who said, this is a case, and this was in regards to, I guess 30 years ago now, but he said, this is a case which, in my opinion, should never recur. He went on to say, I expect the Department of Finance and other departments to study this ruling carefully and remind everyone within the public service that we are a parliamentary democracy, not a so-called executive democracy, and you made reference to this potentially being an executive decision, not a so-called administrative democracy. So in your opinion, do you think something like this should ever happen again?
Well, I think it's quite honestly the responsibility of this committee to find out why it happened, how it happened, and how to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Because it does, in my opinion, rattle Canadians' confidence in Parliament and their ability to trust government. And so, I think it's a huge affront to democracy, irregardless the intent behind it. It's something that this committee is now charged with trying to find a cause, and then ensure that there are steps taken to ensure that this current government and any future government and all future ministries and departments moving forward have a very clear direction, understanding, and guidance on how to ensure it doesn't happen in the future.
Thank you. As well, I will add that Mr. Speaker Fraser, and this was not in a prima facie case, went on in his ruling to state that, I want the House to understand very clearly that if your Speaker ever has to consider a situation like this again, the Chair may not be as generous. So then would you say, Mr. Motz, that the committee should in fact go to any lengths, take as long as is necessary to determine how and why this happened? Do you feel we have an obligation to the Canadian public to do that?
Again, I don't want to presume the will of the committee, but I think it's critical that this committee recognizes the importance of the study that's before you, recognizes that this isn't about this incident, as I said clearly, only just about this incident. It's about a broader issue, a larger thing that other speakers have had to contend with, that we know, causes confusion to the public and undermines the authority of Parliament and of elected officials. And it's really through Parliament, as we all know and we all understand here, that we are the voice of Canadians when we're here. And so when bureaucratic officials or departments or ministers or anybody circumvents that process, then really the voice of Canadians is no longer heard. So yes, I think it's incumbent upon this committee to ask as many questions as you need to ask and find out from as many witnesses as you can on this situation and how to prevent it from happening, and then what to do about this current one as well.
Thank you, Mr. Motz.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thanks for being on time because there is another committee coming in here at 1. Mr. Christofferson.
Very good. Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much, Mr. Motz. Appreciate you coming in, Glenn. Thank you. I have to say that, like a few people here, I've been around the bush on this one, both here, but also in a previous life at Queen's Park. We had a very similar thing. And I have to say that for me, I very much liken this kind of issue, and Scotty, you and I have been down the road on this a few times, is the MP's access to the House. The principle is a really, really big deal. And that's why whenever there's a prima facie case that members may have been held up in accessing the House, usually with the buses, that's the usual place where we have a problem, then we get into the details of it and find out just, how much skullduggery is behind the incident that happened. And I see this very similarly. The principle is a really big deal. No government or entity or agency of government has the right to purport to the Canadian people that something is the law if the Parliament hasn't passed it. And I don't care how big your majority is, only Parliament can pass laws. And since it's not automatic, not everybody is a robot, people can vote the way they want in the moment until it's passed. Let's put it another way. It's not the law until it's the law. And so to me, I see this the same way. I have a real concern, and my background as a former Ontario Solicitor General in terms of the involvement of the police and their role in society and government and its interface is an area that I have some interest and experience in, and so understand the severity of why you brought this forward. But I'm very much with Mr. Sims, Chair, in terms of, to me, a lot of this is going to turn on intent. It did happen, so the government's got to take the hit for the fact that it happened. And we want to hear, some appropriate bowing and scraping about how it's not going to happen again. But whether or not the government conspired with the RCMP to deliberately mislead the Canadian public, or whether it was a comedy of errors, remains to be seen. And so I think we're in the right place. I think that it was appropriate that this matter be sent here. It is a big deal. We need to treat it as a big deal. But I'm very much looking forward to our second meeting where we sort of have the other side, if you will. There's always two sides. To get a sense of how close are we to conspiratorial action versus what, a bunch of clowns. And to me, that will be the determination of how much time and how much effort we should spend going forward. I don't really have any questions for you, Glenn. I thought you made your case very clearly, very articulately. You backed it up. So I have no questions of you, but I would afford you, if you wished it, an opportunity to take the floor and clarify any other points that you wish.
Thank you, Mr. Christopherson. I appreciate your comments, and I would agree with them. I think it's fair to suggest that this committee, as has been suggested, needs to look at this in totality, and it is similar to other cases with which there have been, contempts of Parliament upheld. But I think this doesn't just impact, me as an MP. This impacts the Canadian public in a way that's a little different, in that there was actions that could have been taken. And the intent behind this, whether it is, as you put it, a comedy of errors or some willful, suggestion, I must make it very, very clear. I don't believe, I have many current and former members of the RCMP who are great friends and, are great police officers. And I don't believe for a moment that this whole, behind all of this is in any way designed to malign the RCMP, because nothing could be furthest from the truth, is my intent. But I think it's important to recognize that C-71 gives the RCMP some reclassification authorities that they never had previous to the C-71. And the Canadian public is suspect of that. So when they see that an institution of the Canadian government, which is law enforcement, the RCMP, is even presumptuous in their language or believing that this is going to happen, it brings that organization into disrepute even more and discredits them. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. And we're here to ensure that those public institutions that we hold true in this land have the confidence of our constituents. And so, it's important that however this happened, which this committee will definitely, I'm confident this committee will certainly find out, that there's mechanism, checks and balances in place that are placed there to ensure that those competencies can be maintained, that there is boundaries, that bureaucrats and the agencies that they answer to can follow and clearly understand what those might be.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Motz, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Christopherson. Now we'll go on to Mr. Biddle.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank Mr. Motz for bringing this to the committee's attention. And I agree with Mr. Sims that, and I'll carry on for him, that this is a particularly troubling issue and something that the committee should be looking into. And Mr. Motz and Mr. Christopherson and everyone who's spoken here is correct, that the issue of parliamentary privilege is something that's important and needs to be maintained, and if there is a breach of that, that's something to be discussed. So, like Mr. Sims, though, however, I will be focusing more on the issue of intention. So I guess I'll start with a simple question. You'll agree with me that the RCMP is an independent agency. The minister does not govern the day-to-day affairs of.
Yes, the RCMP is an independent agency that answers directly to the Minister of Public Safety.
Okay. Okay, we're all on the same page. And so, and I was looking through your Wikipedia page when you got here, and this is the interesting thing about this workplace is that we all have Wikipedia pages about us, and very much impressed by your background and your years of service with the Medicine Hat Police Force, Order of Merit, retired as an inspector in the department. And so, having been a lawyer in my time, I represented both a police service and I've also represented a police association, and two different ones. And mistakes happen in those agencies. In your 35 years, and mistakes I'm sure happened in those 35 years in the police department, and not necessarily your responsibility, how many times did you blame the mayor's office or the police service board for a day-to-day mistake that happened in the Medicine Hat Police Department?
Well, the mayor's office and the police board are not responsible for the operations of the police service.
But they report back, but the police department then is answerable to the mayor's office and the police service board, similar to what we just described with the RCMP.
Yes, I think if there's any blame, I know from an administrative perspective, we certainly looked at government to blame many times, and I was on that side of the fence for issues in legislation, but I see where you're going with this. It's fair to suggest that if the mayor's office or the police commission in our province, it was police commissions, if the police commission wanted our police service to respond to something specific in our community, then we took the direction from that police commission.
Okay, but not on day-to-day issues, and they didn't tell you what to report. They told you in terms of reporting back and what they wanted to see, but not in terms of day-to-day issues. I guess what I'm getting at is I'm concerned that there's a valid question here to be discussed, but that this is an opportunity to take a swing at the minister, to question his integrity without evidence. Ironically enough, using parliamentary privilege, because you're saying it in the committee and not out in the hallways. So it would seem to me that for this alternative, because on one hand you said it seems like a technical issue, and maybe it is a technical issue, but on the other hand, there potentially is a broad conspiracy where the Minister of Public Safety notified presumably the acting commissioner of the RCMP, who notified someone else, who notified someone else, who notified someone else, who notified someone else, who notified the person in charge of the web. I'm guessing that person's pretty low on the hierarchy in the RCMP. I doubt the director or the commissioner of the RCMP changes the website. So you potentially have 10, 20, 100 people involved in this conspiracy. And in Ottawa, as would be the case in Washington or any other capitals, those things don't stay secret. So are those the two options, that it was a technical breach or there is a vast conspiracy between the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Minister's office to conspire on this particular issue? Because I don't see any other option. It's either one or the other. And do you honestly believe that there's a conspiracy?
What I believe doesn't matter to this committee.
I'm sorry, what you believe?
What I believe actually happened shouldn't matter to this committee. The facts that you uncover should matter to this committee. The evidence you uncover as to exactly how this was allowed to happen is what's important. Do I have suspicions? Yes.
You have suspicions of a conspiracy?
No, I didn't say that. You said
that. Well, then what's the suspicion then? So you question the integrity of the minister. You have these suspicions without any evidence. You now say that your opinion doesn't matter, which it should, because you're the one bringing this case forward, and you're the one taking the minister and questioning his integrity without any basis. And clearly there's an issue that we all agree that there's an issue on privilege. But where is this coming from? So what's involved here? What's involved at the end of the day? Where do you think this is coming from? Because we're here, we want to hear what you think. And the Speaker agreed that there's an issue based on your report, based on your concerns to the Speaker. But is it a technical breach? And it's probably a technical issue. Or is it a vast conspiracy? And if you say you have suspicions, what is your suspicion of?
Well, if you think that, the committee's responsibility is to find out, did the RCMP, who the Canadian Firearms Program
I understand what the committee's responsibility is. I'm a member of the committee.
Well, let me finish and I can answer your question.
Mr. Motz, I only have 7 minutes and I'm running out of time. Do you think, and I'll ask it straight out, what is your suspicion of? I know what my role is, and we have to go and find the facts.
Right.
What is your suspicion that we should be going to find the facts? Is it of this vast conspiracy? Should I be asking questions about a vast conspiracy involving hundreds of people to change a line on a website, contrary to probably law?
It is fair to suggest that the people in the Canadian Firearms Program are not going to go and presume anything unless they're directed to do so.
So I guess for the record, then you believe that there's a conspiracy
No,
handed down from the minister
No.
straight through the RCMP commissioner's office. Well,
not
it's
at
one
all
or the
what I
other,
said.
Mr. Motz.
That's not at all what I said.
You make these
Don't put
suggestions.
words in my
you
mouth,
cast,
Mr.
Mr.
Biddle.
Motz, I have the floor. You make these assumptions. You cast these dispersions. You have no evidence. And at the end of the day, you're still suggesting maybe there's a conspiracy. And I see I'm running out of time.
You're out of time.
But maybe you should go into the hallway and suggest that the minister's involved in these things.
Time's Mr. Biddle.
You can ask here.
Okay, we'll go on now for 5 minutes to Mr. Nader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you, Mr. Motz, for joining us. I might follow up a little bit on, what Mr. Biddle was going on, and my question to you is, do you think there's a process in place within a government department for approval of notices and information that goes out to the public? Do you assume that there's a process that ought to be followed, and could there perhaps have been a breakdown in this process?
Absolutely. I mean, let's look at this. This is the Minister of Public Safety's bill. Bill C-71 was his. It's his push to get it through committee and with time allocation in the House and a rush to get it through committee. This is something that and again, the committee did not allow for any amendments of any substance that are going to change the consequence of the bill. So it's fair to suggest that they're not going to be blind to the fact that in the way government works, the way departments work, the people who actually put information on the website got their direction from somebody to do it, and the choice of language was not, was it an oversight? These are pretty bright people who clearly understand the implications, and I think they were under the impression that it's going to happen. If they were either that or they're willfully blind to the fact that it was still before Parliament, still before committee, hadn't even gone to third reading, hadn't been to the Senate. And so, people can suggest what they want to suggest, but, the minister is responsible for, and his department is responsible for the communication on this bill, and then how it's acted out by an agency who's then responsible to enforce it, which is the RCMP.
So it'd be worthwhile for us to look at that approval process, look at how communiques, bulletins are approved, and find out where, in that process there was a breakdown in communication.
I think that would be more than fair, Mr. Nader.
No, I appreciate that. Now, I want to follow up. It's been mentioned you have an extensive background in policing as an inspector. From your police background, when information like this is circulated, which at the very least causes confusion, what kind of effect does this have on a policing community and on a law enforcement community, and those who are going to be interacting with the law enforcement community? What is the effect of this confusion from your background?
Well, there's a couple. I mean, first of all, the confusion that it creates for the gun-owning Canadian public, that's one. But many of the municipal agencies and provincial agencies and law enforcement agencies in this country receive action bulletins and law bulletins from the RCMP, who have been involved with or play these things out and are responsible for programs such as the Canadian Firearms Program. So it's possible that it could cause confusion for them. It could possible that they could without checking, someone could believe that this is in fact already enacted, and make an error in that regard. Thankfully, I'm not aware of anything happening like that. It was changed, but it's possible.
Now, certainly, when the Speaker made his ruling, he noted the fact that this was a slight against the authority and dignity of the House of Commons. When he was finding the prima facie ruling, certainly it falls to us to find out exactly what happened, why it happened, where the failure happened. But curious as well if we should be looking at hearing from certain witnesses who may have been affected by this or may have potentially been impacted, the target of these bulletins, the information coming out, whether you think there should be some efforts to reach out to certain groups or organizations that could have potentially been impacted by this.
I think that's more than fair. I think it's essential to call people who are impacted or were impacted to speak to that, the confusion it created by this mistake, and what the consequences were. Their Canadian Coalition of of firearms rights, the Canadian Sports Shooters Association, the Canadian Sports Arms and Ammunition Association. These are groups that represent a large vast of the Canadian shooting public, firearm owning public. It's their memberships, and I think they can clearly speak to it. Wolverine Supplies is one who is a distributor of firearms in this country, who can speak to the impact that misinformation could have to him directly, or to him being the business in the male sense, to that business, and then to the retailers down the line. Not only did it had the potential to impact the Canadian gun owners, but also the businesses that make their business off of that industry.
So now,
Thank you, Mr. Nader.
thank you, Chair.
Now we'll go on to Ms. Sahota for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Motz. In your previous testimony here today, between your interaction with Ms. Kusi, there was some discussion as to the impact this posting on the website had to people in your community and to people waking up the next day thinking that that they're going to have repercussions to face. Can you explain that to me a little bit more, what people in your community felt?
Well, this wasn't just my community. As you know, I had been involved in the discussions on C-71 on social media, as well as hosting and being involved in town halls and roundtables on discussions of C-71 with the Canadian public. As a result of those activities, there was many people following some of our social media feeds, and so we received feedback from them, as well as other offices were also receiving information. And I guess it would be fair to suggest that the confusion as to they were hearing that we were still debating this issue, and yet the RCMP were saying that it's going to happen. It's happening now. You will have to do this. You will be doing this, and specifically to aspects of C-71. And so, there was confusion and there was alarm, and it's something that that's obviously we want to try and prevent.
No, absolutely, and I can see that the changes that have been made to the site since since the time that you brought this matter up. But even in the original text, although it didn't state proposed legislation every step of the way, I guess those are the amendments that they made, it did still in the general information section listed as proposed legislation, and then also indicated that the order would provide protection from criminal prosecution for illegal possession of these firearms until February 28th, 2021. So many years out, while the government implements measures to address continued possession and use. So there was an amnesty within that, and a long time before any kind of criminal prosecutions or before this would take effect. And that was listed right in the onset of what was online. And the reason I'm bringing this up is going back to the issue of intent. What was the intent? And was this malicious? Was this done in order to scare people? Or was this done from above to below? Or was this an error that was made down below and then corrected? So what is your feeling on that? Like, if they had included that right in the general information section, I think they could have done a little bit better. But do you think their intent was to, as my other colleague suggested, was it some kind of conspiracy from up above, that their intent was to make people feel that they were going to be prosecuted under the law that wasn't enacted at that point?
No, I mean, absolutely not. I want to make it very, very clear again. I don't believe there's any malicious intent on anyone's part. I think this was, and Mr. Sims took exception to my choice of words were arrogance. I think if the Canadian public had any comment back to me, it was that the apparent arrogance of believing that because of a majority that this is going to happen anyway, no matter what happens, no one's going to stop what we want to do. It's going to happen. So let's just tell the public it's going to happen. That's the anger that the Canadian public is up in arms about. That's what they're saying. That's not democracy. It's not democracy at all.
Is it possible to have that type of thinking within the department, within the RCMP? And is it possible that the RCMP, as my colleague suggested, was trying to prepare for a possible outcome and therefore alert public to things that may be coming? Is that possible as well?
Absolutely. And I applaud them for being proactive in their approach. The language they use, and I think, to use your statement earlier, just from a minute ago, ma'am, I think it's fair to say that maybe even in departments, there is the presumption that it's going to happen anyway. We can just go ahead and start doing it even before it's passed. And that's the role of this committee, to try and say, well, hold on a second. You can say, if this is passed, this is some of the things, because some laws that happen that we're working on will take people time to make adjustments to. So being proactive in that, no one's faulting the RCMP for being proactive. The issue here is the presumption that it's been passed in Parliament when it has not, the confusion it caused, and where did that come from? Like, where does that mentality come from? Does it come from an attitude? Does it come from a systemic issue? Like, I don't know, and that's one of the things that we have to try and prevent from happening. I don't suggest for a moment there was any malicious intent or a conspiracy, as Mr. Biddle suggested, that somebody was saying this. I just think that there's potentially a systemic challenge that governments can have, departments can have, public servants can have, that cloud the reality of the role of Parliament. And so we need to be mindful of that.
Thank you, Ms. Sahota.
Thank you.
We'll now go on to Monsieur Paul Huss.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to be here at the committee. First of all, I would like to clarify some things, because this is the procedure committee, and what we are doing here really is a kind of inquisition to see whether our colleague, who is a parliamentarian like we all are, has the right to speak here. He never attacked the minister. We are not here to attack anyone or to accuse the minister, but we're dealing with an incident that has consequences. It could happen with some other issue, but this is the first time that the committee has actually dealt with this kind of issue. I think that people are accusing Mr. Mott of having bad intentions, so I think you should think carefully about that. We have the bill C-71 that was brought in by the Minister of Public Safety. We had proposed 46 amendments because there were problems that concerned firearms gun owners, because they would become criminals in many cases under this legislation. The RCMP published a bulletin indicating that the measures will be in place when the bill hadn't even been passed. Now, there is a question of privilege. It's your privilege as well. On the Liberal side, it's all parliamentarians who are affected, both sides of the table. I can see that they're busy doing other things and not listening to what I'm saying, but I don't think we should accuse Mr. Mott of having bad intentions. First of all, we need to understand where the directive came from. If there was a directive, was it the minister? Yes or no? And also whether the RCMP has procedures. Does it publish information even before the legislation has been approved? If that is the procedure, then the RCMP has to be asked to change it. We just want to settle this question. We don't want to conduct a trial. If there is a policy, there's a problem for the minister. If not, then it's at the RCMP level. The RCMP commissioner has procedures in place. Well, if that's the case, then the minister has to ask the commissioner to change them. The major problem is that this is the first time the procedure is dealing with this kind of question of privilege. We're not talking about offshore fishing. We're talking about firearms and consequences for Canadians. With the information that was in the bulletin, then people had to deal with the problems that could raise and whether they would be grandfathered and so on. But this is a question of privilege, and if you don't find that to be the case, we might as well go home if we can't resolve this issue. So how much time do I have? 2 minutes. I'm not a regular member of this committee, but I think that the point that has been raised is important. We're talking about firearms, the management of firearms, and so, Mr. Motz, do you think we need a clear answer from the minister about what happened?
For your comments and your question, I think not only do parliamentarians need clarity around what happened and an understanding of the steps that were taken or not taken for this to occur, I think Canadians deserve it. The Canadians deserve this. I mean, this institution is our democracy in this country, and it's a model for the world, and so we need to take that seriously, and I know this committee will. And I think, in the moments that are left, I think it's important that beyond any apology that seems to be able to satisfy inquiry on these things, I think beyond whatever apology, should that be the will of the committee, we need to look at how to prevent this from happening again. And, in this circumstance, it affected the firearms community. In the next circumstance, with a publication from government, it could be anything you can imagine that this Parliament deals with. So we need to be, as parliamentarians, concerned that the role of what we do here as legislators is not undermined or usurped.
Thank you very much. Now the Liberals have ceded their next spot to Mr. Christofferson.
Oh, how kind. It gives me an opportunity to raise the issue I raised with you earlier then, Chair, if I may.
We have to finish this debate first.
Well, can I hold my 5 minutes till then?
We'll just bring that up at the end, but we will be leaving at 1 o'clock exactly. Does anyone else have wants to go on questions on this witness? Okay. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, sir.
We appreciate it, and we will be continuing our study with it's great to have you here today and bringing up this important subject.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Christofferson has just asked if we can go back to committee business for a minute.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
If it's okay with members of the committee for a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
We will be leaving at 1, though. Okay. There's another committee's coming in.
Right.
Sorry?
Are we going back in camera or are we staying public?
Oh, yeah, I guess we should.
Well, it's got to do with the public meeting. So I'm in your hands. No big secret. No, we're good in public. I'm good in public, and we're worried about the time and anything. Here's the thing. Okay. If I could just jump right in, Chair. And I apologize for not being here right at the top to deal with this. So I do apologize. We brought Mr. Johnson in as a result of the announcement today by the government. That's a good thing. But I got to tell you, Chair, we need the minister here, because if this was legislation, which it's not because the government ran out of time, then we would have the minister here to introduce the legislation, and then we would go from there. This way, we're kind of putting the cart in front of the horse, in that we're not dealing with the fundamental announcement that leads to why that person has a new appointment. So could I ask the committee to agree that without increasing time or anything, that the minister be here also with Mr. Johnson to explain both the commission, and then logic would then have it, we could then talk about the person who's actually being appointed, the commissioner. So could we do that, colleagues?
We can ask. As Mr. Christopherson he did come over beforehand and did ask, and I said I would bring that matter forward. I don't have the minister's calendar, and the parliamentary secretary.
Could we get the government members to agree that, in principle, though they do agree the minister should be here, as if this was legislation? Because it's brand new. I mean,
it's brand new, and I take your point. But on issues of appointments, we haven't brought in the minister before, and it's not something that we've done in the past.
No, it's a brand new. It's a brand new entity. It's brand new. Anytime, if this was legislation, the minister would be here as a matter of course. But you guys so mismanaged your file on democratic reform that you ran out of time. And now you got to do it by edict. At the very least, the committee should have an opportunity to talk about it, given how much time we spent on our report, the very report that the minister seems to have conveniently ignored and run roughshod over. Like, we are ticked about this, and we at least need an opportunity to talk about the structure that's being brought in unilaterally. And the only way we can do that is to respectfully ask the minister to please come along with her appointee.
Thanks, David. I'm sorry, we're going to have to go. We think a very important group coming in here, and we'll have to continue this discussion.
Well, this isn't going away, just let you know.
Okay.